Good morning, everyone. Welcome to week 3 of phase 2. Forgive us for moving around, but change of scenery slightly. I'm Paul Griffiths. I'll have met most, if not all of you already. I think there are some new faces in the room this morning. My colleague Simon Barclay. First thing I'm going to do this morning is hand over to the council for the housekeeping announcements, which will be quite familiar by now, but well worth doing. Go ahead.
Morning, everybody. Just a few housekeeping notes. Most of you were here before the last couple of weeks, so you'll know the score, but as the Inspector said, there's a few new people here anyway. First of all, if you haven't signed in at the desk at the front, during the break, if you can please sign in, just so we know a record of who's attended. We aren't expecting a fire alarm to go off today, so if it is an alarm, it is a genuine emergency. If that does occur, if you make your way out of the building through the front doors and congregate on the junction of Gillygate and Clement Terrace, just by the traffic lights, just around the corner. In terms of door security, we are expecting people in the building today for other users, so they'll be in and out of the building. If, however, you do see somebody around that you don't expect to be around, please inform one of the staff and we'll go and sort things out. Toilets are just in the corridor, just off that side. We are filming the sessions today. As you can see, there's a camera here. If you have an issue with that, and you don't want to film, please speak to Carol Crooks and she'll move you to a table where the camera won't pan around to view you. Please ensure that your mobile phones are turned to silent today, please. The internet connection is very good. It's Citadel Guest, and the password, it's all one word, General Booth 1883 with a capital G and capital B. Just one final thing also, in terms of speaking, if you want to speak, put your name card on its end, get the attention of the inspectors and they will inform you to have you speak. Just press the red button on your microphone to speak, and once you finish speaking, turn it off with the button. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to hand over to my colleague now, talk about how we intend to approach proceedings today. Sorry. Oh, yeah, it might be worth... Yeah, let's go round the table. I'll start with you, Mr. Elvin, if you could introduce yourselves to the hearing today.
So, excuse me, nearly forgot my name. Good morning. I'm David Elvin, Queen's Counsel, and I'm appearing with Scott Linus, QC, and Matt Henderson, who's sitting behind me for the Council. Thank you.
Sarah Dormer-Maid, Local Plan Project Officer, York City Council.
Russ Porter from Porter Planning Economics, here on behalf of the Council to cover viability of the whole plan.
Julian Ridge, I am the Sustainable Transport Manager for City of York Council.
I'm Lynn Clark, this is my husband Bob. We're just elderly citizens of York, and we walk and cycle and drive and take public transport in York, and we wanted to look at the local plan to see how it affected us, and that's why we're here today. Thank you.
So, yes, I'm Bob Clark. I'm Lynn's husband.
Mark Johnson, Johnson Mowat on behalf of Red Rowan Taylor Wimpey.
Morning, Paul Butler here on behalf of TW Fields.
Good morning, Peter Fawcett from Gladden Developments.
Morning everybody, Stuart Natkus, Barton Wilmore on behalf of Barrett and David Wilson Homes.
Dave Merritt, representing York Environment Forum, York Labour Party and York and District Trades Council.
Good morning, Neil Jones, consultant at Rapley's, representing British Sugar.
Good morning, Nick Fell from Rapley's, representing British Sugar.
Good morning, Graham Collett from York Bus Forum.
Morning, Tim Waring from Quad LDP. Good morning, Andy Haynes from Bidwell's, LDP.
Morning, Mary Cook from Town Legal, LDP.
Michael Corsia, Fulford Parish Council.
Anthony Main, representing York Civic Trust.
Catherine Dukes, Directions Planning.
Phil Robert, Cushman and Wakefield, representative local resident Mr Harrison.
Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone, and welcome. If I could just ask if, when you are speaking, it does help an awful lot if you pull your microphone quite close. It makes quite a difference. So if I could ask everyone to be vigilant in that respect, I'd be grateful. So today then is about infrastructure requirements, delivery and development viability. That is matter 6. Generally speaking, the way that we're going to break this down is to take issues 6.1 through to 6.4 inclusive, because they are generally about very similar things. And in essence, the questions that we are seeking the answers to is what is needed, where, when, how much will it cost, and who's going to pay, if I can put it as crudely as that. I think that it may help us to break that discussion down, though, just a little bit in terms of citywide infrastructure and site-specific infrastructure, and take those two things separately. So that's what we'd like to do first of all. And then, having done all of that, move on to the question of viability. So does that make sense to everybody? Excellent. I shall take silence as tacit agreement. Before we do all of that, though, I'm going to ask the Council to give us a brief overview. I don't know who to look to on your side, Mr. Elvin, first of all.
Me. And I'll introduce various people to assist you with various of the infrastructure issues. The issues have raised a general question about a need to update the requirements and to clarify what is now proposed. And we have done that. We were preparing an update anyway, but we produced that last week, which is XCYC 79, which is the Local Plan Infrastructure Delivery Strategy Update Note, dated this month, obviously. And you'll find there an update which various people will speak to briefly in a moment. What you will find is at C1, C, you'll get an overview. C1 will deal particularly with the transport-related issues. C2 will deal with the education-related issues. And then there's a general catch-all other supporting infrastructure in C3, page 15. And then there is appended a project schedule in Appendix 1, which gives you a detailed overview of what projects are in place, whether they are related to if you look at page 18, for example, whether they relate to a specific site or whether they are York-wide improvements that are being delivered in any event, regardless of the strategic sites. So you've got a series of proposed projects, and they will generally tell you the cost where that is available in indicative terms and in committed terms, and you will see the funding sources are identified in the penultimate column. There are grey areas which indicate indicative costing which have fed into the update to the viability assessment, which is Appendix 2 to our hearing statement for Phase 2 for Matter 6, which Russ Porter will speak to. And that will hopefully give you a detailed update as to what is needed for what and paid for by whom. I should say that there isn't an update as yet to the Gantt chart, which was produced by reference to the last update. That is proposed to be provided should you require it in time for Phase 3. But we wanted to get to you an update to the general details. I should say, of course, and this will be for the site-specific sessions, that some of these particular issues are still work in progress, ready for the site-specifics, and you'll see where the indicative costings come in. We have statements of common ground with most of the proposed sites. We are working still with others, including, for example, ST15, and additional highways modelling is being done both locally and in tandem with the requirements of national highways, and that you'll see in the statement of common ground that there are a whole series of work streams in progress which it's hoped will be completed well before Phase 3. There are detailed work being done, for example, to reduce the indicative costs to more known costs. For example, and Mr. Porter will speak to this, he has assumed, say, with some of the larger sites, including ST15, a straight line contribution to the straight line payment of the infrastructure costs up front, when in fact the reality is likely to be much more refined. So hence, the first table he produces in his Appendix 2 is a worse than worst case in some respects, because it's assuming entirely up front-loaded infrastructure costs, when in fact that won't be necessary. And we will refine that further. But so he will tell you, and I'm going to let him speak when we get to the viability bit. He'll explain to you that his starting point is the second table rather than the first. In terms of methodology, he explains that the main issue that seems to have arisen over methodology is by Mr. Roebuck for Mr. Harrison. And he raises issues about the density of the proposals. I'll just give you the references now. I'll ask Mr. Porter to go through those when we get to the viability bit. You'll find the 2018 update in core document 018, tables 5.1 and 5.2. 5.1 sets out his general assumptions depending on type and location of housing. 5.2 is his analysis of what each site can be expected to produce in terms of the density of development. That's internal pages 33 and 35 to 35 of CD 18, PDF 56 to 58. And you'll find the updated version of his table 5.2 is table A1 in the Appendix 2 Matter 6 paper, which gives you the updated figures. They've largely been updated by reference to, for example, to what is now known about individual developments, and some which have got planning permission. In most cases, the density's gone up as a result of the grant of planning permission. In some, it's had to be, in one I think at least, it's had to be adjusted downwards. Mr. Porter will explain in due course when we get to it why he disagrees with the Cushman and Wakefield approach. I think at that point I will ask three people to respond on the update. Firstly, Mr. Mahmood on the Gantt chart and what's been done. Then, Sarah Moore will just give you a brief rundown on the education update, and then Mr. Ridge will give you a transportation update by reference to the CYC 79 document. Ms. Mahmood.
Thank you.
So as Mr Elvin has outlined, we produced the EXCYC 70A Gantt chart. The note EXCYC 79 updates that, and now we'll move to working in the context of the various statements of common ground to refine that and produce a further series of Gantt charts for you relating to those site-specific matters as outlined. I don't know that I have much more to add to the statement outlined, unless there are any specific questions about that or the format in which you'd wish to see it.
The formats, yes, I do like a good Gantt chart. So if we could have an update of that in due course. Is it so different to the 70A Gantt chart that the 70A Gantt chart is useless for me today?
The 79 Gantt chart brings it up to date with the housing trajectory that was published, so it's nudged along, and so that's why we produced that for you. So those timelines have moved forward. The broad timelines are shown within the table.
Okay, so I should look at that one then rather than the now superseded one, because it might cause me difficulties and misunderstandings otherwise.
Yes, sir, that's the most up-to-date, with a view again to providing the more detailed Gantt charts in conversations with the strategic site developers to deal with the sorts of cash flow issues that Mr Elvin outlined at the top of the session.
Okay, thank you.
If Ms Moy could then deal briefly with the update to the education position, please.
Good morning, my name's Sarah Moyer, I'm the School Place Planning Officer for the Council. We have a statutory duty at the Council to ensure a sufficient number of education school places across the city. To achieve this, we forecast for 7 years for secondary education, which is a little bit easier because the children have actually been born. So for primary, we forecast we're using actual birth data for 3 years, and after that, it's projected birth data from the ONS. So as part of that forecasting, we use pupil yield information from new housing developments, and we've done some recent analysis in 2020 which updated our information about this. It was based on the school census data from January each year and used postcodes from known new housing and maturing housing across the city. So the difference that we see in this longitudinal analysis in 2020 compared with previous pupil yield information from 2014 is that in this analysis we wanted more information about how the developments, how the pupil yield became established in the development. So it was a longitudinal, it started with first occupation and progressed through the lifetime of the housing, whereas in 2014 it'd been a more snapshot approach, looking at a set period of time and looking at various housing developments, and that's why we're seeing differences. So the main two differences to draw your attention to are that we saw a greater increase in pupil yield from the 2020 analysis. It was 37% primary pupil yield compared to the snapshot analysis, which had shown 25% primary pupil yield and 26% secondary pupil yield, compared with about 14% secondary pupil yield we'd seen previously.
Sorry, do forgive me. Just to make sure that I heard that correctly, I think you're saying it's an increase in pupil yield both in primary and secondary.
That's right, yeah, that's right. When we examined the housing developments and we tracked them throughout their life cycles, we were looking for the maximum pupil yield that's likely to be reached from these housing developments, and that's what we saw. It was an increase. And the second finding that we found is that it takes longer than we'd previously thought for housing developments to generate maximum pupil yield. Average maximum pupil yield, that is. So it was 8 to 10 years for primary to reach its steady state and 13 to 15 years for secondary.
So if you could just bear with me a sec while my note-taking catches up.
Sorry. A lot of information.
Sorry, did you say 10 to 12 for secondary?
13 to 15 years. But obviously, there's not many housing developments that have reached that point, so we are still analysing this. We are still increasing the information that we add to this.
And what was it for primary?
8 to 10 years for it to reach maximum pupil yield for primary.
And just so I'm absolutely sure, you said you were the school place planning officer.
That's right.
Is that for the local education authority?
Yeah, that's right, for the council.
Okay, if you carry on, thank you.
Okay. So the other information that we've taken from this data is we've looked at how many reception age children and year 7 children arrive from new housing developments, and we've tracked them as the development has become established, looking at the number of houses and how that relates to the number of year 7 and reception age children we can expect, because obviously they're the two main points of entry into the school system for most children. And that information allows us to look at new housing developments and look at when on more geographically isolated developments we might need new school provision. So the new findings from this 2020 study that we didn't have in 2014, we hadn't looked at then, were the number of children with SEND that we might expect from a new housing development. So that's based on the number of children with the HCPs and those in specialist provision, and also the retention rate for 16 to 18-year-olds. So as I say, we are going to continue to update this information as time goes by and more housing developments can be added to this analysis. Thank you.
Just before handing over to Mr. Ridge to deal with the transportation side, one point of clarification I was going to raise at the outset was just it's been raised possibly by the parish council and others as to the question of self-contained settlements, particularly in relation to ST 15, 7 and 14. The position is clear. We are looking for sustainable new settlements. We are not looking for self-contained settlements. We can explain that further. I'll ask Ms. Dilmamo just to explain that in a moment. Experience suggests that it's not desirable to create the scale of settlement that's required for self-containment. And indeed, there's quite a useful guidance paper by the Town and Country Planning Association, guidance sorry, let me get the title for it. Garden City Standards for the 21st Century, Guide 1. And there's a recommendation which specifically covers this issue and indeed advises against it based on past experience. It's not in the inquiry library, but I can provide the details to Carol so it can go in. It's page 16 of the guide, which deals with, it says today, it is not only undesirable but also impossible to create a place which is entirely self-contained. New garden cities, I appreciate this is, no one's proposing a new garden city, but the same principle applies, we say, will always become part of the existing network of development across the country and points out the difficulties that have been experienced in the past. Perhaps I can ask Ms. Dilmamo just to comment a little further.
So to the point that the Council's objective is to create sustainable communities, this is summarised in policy DP3 and point 6 to 11 in particular, which outlines the components of sustainable communities, which are then given policy expression in other plan policies. These principles are directly informed by our infrastructure planning approach and, as I said, articulated in other plan policies, not least sections 3, where we deal with site-specific infrastructure asks, but also policy DM1, which is about ensuring the right infrastructure is secured at the right place, in the right place and at the right time. So we'd like to just sort of separate out this issue of sustainable communities, sustainable settlements and self-sustaining settlements. I don't know that you want to deal with the detail of the submission from Civic Trust at this stage, and so it might be that we want to come to that in detail when you get there in the agenda.
I just wanted to make sure it was flagged up that it's not what the plan is about. i.e. self-containment. And in that case, I'll ask Mr. Ridge to outline the current position and the update on transportation aspects of infrastructure.
Okay. My name's Julian Ridge. I'm the Sustainable Transport Manager for City of York Council. That means I look after transport planning and policy across York, as well as public transport, walking and cycling, the travel behaviour change unit that the council has, and the unit which looks after road safety. So the infrastructure note, which has been presented in the last few days, sets out the infrastructure that we're taking forward for the local plan. I think it's important to say that all of the infrastructure that we're planning and everything that we prepare capitalises on York's 45-year commitment to sustainable transport, which has given us one of the largest sustainable transport asset bases in the country, particularly in terms of a well-developed cycle and walking off-road and on-road network, and 6 park and ride sites, and one of the most electrified bus networks in the country. The infrastructure note makes it clear that this has allowed us to place around 60% of the plan's development adjacent to existing high-frequency bus routes and walking and cycle routes. This means that as a local plan comes forward, it will be adding to the viability of those routes and allowing us to develop them further. But it will also reduce the traffic impact of the plan overall because people will have access to sustainable modes. Now, the infrastructure plan sets out 4 types of infrastructure that are being taken forward, some by ourselves and some by national bodies, and I know we have National Highways with us in the room here. But in terms of these 4 types of infrastructure, we have large amounts of national strategic infrastructure coming to York, particularly in terms of widespread improvements to the rail network, enhancements to some of the key routes around York, and possible provision of a station at Haxby. We also have enhancements to some of the road network which are being taken forward in discussion with National Highways. These obviously are going ahead irrespective of the local plan, but they will help to accommodate the trips that the plan's development will generate in a sustainable fashion. We then have a series of interventions which we are taking forward as City of York Council to accommodate trip growth at a local level. The most obvious and perhaps the biggest examples of that are the development of the northern outer ring road in York, where we're dualling a large section of the ring road, but also in the city centre we have really extensive sustainable transport improvements going ahead in the shape of both York Central and the redevelopment of the frontage of York railway station, which will give a much larger and better bus interchange in the city, as well as improving access to the station, and is intended to accommodate trip growth to and from the railway station associated with the growth of York and the growth of rail travel more generally. We also have a set of interventions that we are taking forward to deliver the Council's progressive transport policies. Those relate particularly to the development of the bus network and development of walk and cycle networks in the city. And then the note also outlines a number of schemes that we're taking forward which are specific to delivering individual local plan sites, in particular road junctions, enhancements to the bus networks. Some of these interventions are quite substantial, particularly the junction and the access roads required for site ST15, and they are laid out in the infrastructure note. I think it's important to say that the infrastructure note is not exhaustive. It is the schemes which are required to deliver the local plan growth. Obviously, there are a whole suite of usually much smaller schemes that we're taking forward as an authority as part of our capital programme, particularly around walking, cycling, small changes to road junctions, improvements to the bus network, etc., etc. Anyway, so the infrastructure plan sets out 39 schemes across the transport network. I think it's useful to highlight 1 or 2 of the major projects that we're taking forward that are going to make a big contribution to accommodating the growth that we see across the city. So these are particularly the A1237 Northern Ring Road dualling between the A19 Shipton Road and Hopgrove. That's a £72 million investment, which will include, as well as dualling the vehicle lanes, a new orbital cycle route. York Station Gateway and York Central, as I've already said, they will transform the area around York Station to accommodate growth in passenger numbers, both on the rail and the bus network. We have a comprehensive programme of improvements to the bus network throughout the plan period. In the last 6 weeks, we've won £35 million to both purchase 44 electric buses and also deliver general improvements to bus priorities and other aspects of the bus service across the city. And we are also preparing a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan and looking forward to welcoming Active Travel England to York and their involvement in developing our already extensive network of walk and cycle routes. In developing the local plan growth, we're working with a number of transport parties, particularly National Highways, the adjacent local authorities to York, and also developers who will be responsible for delivering interventions linked to their own sites. This is quite a significant task, and there are a number of statements of common ground we've put forward to support that. As the infrastructure plan also sets out, we have upgraded our transport model to give us the best information to inform some of the decisions that we're making about transport investments, and we will make them as the plan period proceeds.
Can I just ask you, Mr. Ridge, just to turn to paragraphs 22 and 23 of the update, page 7, just to explain what the position is in terms of the original assessment of impact on the network. You recall we've had references to additional congestion, delay, etc. Can you just update us on that, please?
Absolutely. The original assessment that was done of the network and is presented in the 2019 transport topic paper forecasts an increase in trips in the AM and PM peak hour periods in York of 22%, and an increase in delay an increase in the amount of time spent travelling on the network of 35% and delay of 65%. I think it's important to issue a bit of a clarification to those numbers, because the increase in trip time of 35% relates to a situation where there are 22% more trips on the network. So it is more...
My apologies. Again, admirably swift delivery, but I simply can't keep up. So yeah, I missed all of those figures. So if you could run those past me again, I'd be grateful.
So the 2019 paper, with transport topic paper, it includes a figure for the number of trips in York in the AM and PM peak periods, and it shows that increasing by 22% between 2016 and 2032. It's a period of the time of the plan. Over that same period, the amount of time, travel time on the network, so time people spend going around in that AM and PM peak, increases by 35%, and the amount of delay, which is the amount of time people spend in traffic queues, increases by 65%. But I think it's important to make the point that those figures are slightly misleading, in the sense that the increase in time on the network of 35% also relates to a situation where there are 20% more trips on the network. So the increase in time per trip is only 10%. And the increase in delay per trip, which again is a subset of the time spent per trip, because it is time per trip spent in a traffic jam. So if you have a 12-minute trip, and it will be the equivalent of a 12-minute trip with 2 minutes of time spent in traffic, becoming a 13-minute trip with 3 minutes of time spent in traffic. So it's a measure of delay. That only increases by 35%. We are currently, with our new traffic model, which has much greater capability than the old model. I think it's important to state that the new model allows us to study transfer between car and bus and park and ride, which the old model simply looked at car. And the new model also allows us to model what's called an interpeak hour, which is the time period between 10 a.m. and 4 p.m., which previously we couldn't do. We are using that to evaluate the traffic growth and situation at the moment. Initial indications are that that model shows a lower level of delay than the model we were using when the plan was prepared in 2018, but we will update that information and present it to phase 3 of the examination.
I think the final point I want to cover, leaving viability until later group of questions, just to draw your attention to the fact that since air quality has been raised, particularly by Fulford Parish Council, we have put into the inquiry library XCYC 78 and 80, which are the air quality monitoring reports for 2021 and 2022. The CYC 80 is the latest and has only been produced this month. We can go through it later should it be necessary, but it gives you the details of the revocation of the Fulford AQMA in 2020, and it also indicates the improvement to air quality within York. And I just wondered if Mr. Ridge could give a quick comment on that, please. I know you're not an air quality expert, but...
Yes. Obviously, a number of the transport interventions that we're taking forward will have a positive effect on air quality across the city, as well as the electrification of the vehicle fleet. And that has enabled a general, the revocation of both the Fulford Road AQMA and also one on Salisbury Terrace in another part of York, and reductions seen in the existing AQMA covering the city centre. We have also upgraded the bus fleet in the last 3 years so that all of the vehicles meet the highest standard of emissions.
That was all I was proposing by way of general introduction, unless you have any questions at this stage, sir.
Only one, I think, and that was for, I'm afraid I didn't catch the lady's name, who's here for the Local Education Authority.
Sarah Moyer. Sarah Moyer, M-O-I-R.
Oh, hello. Yeah, you have confused me now. You're going to keep popping up at various places around the table. Yeah, so I just want to be absolutely clear. In very broad, crude terms, the Local Education Authority is content with the approach that the council and this plan is taking to education. Is that right?
Yeah.
Sounds like a simple question, but you'd be surprised how often the answer to that is no. And that was it. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Clark.
Three things. First, just a point of information from Mr. Ridge. Where are we to find the infrastructure note? Of course, I'm not a professional, as you can probably tell. Our submission was on the original plan, 2018. So just where is the infrastructure note to be found?
I can assist. It's in the examination library. If you go to the library website, Mr. Clark, and you go to the list of City of York documents, and you go to the end of that, because it was uploaded last week, it has the reference EXCYC 79.
Okay, thank you. Second of three, only at this stage. Mr. Ridge describes the cycling network of York as already extensive. I just wish to dispute that, and I'd rather describe it as desultory by comparison with elsewhere that I have experience of cycling networks. And the third thing is this. I've found out just now that it's a big learning curve for me coming to something like this. So I now know what a Gantt chart is, which I didn't know before. And I'm just wondering, one of the examples that we brought up in our submission concerned the cycling corridor. This is just an example that I'm hoping to find some help with. Reference to the Haxby Road, Huntington Road corridor, which occurred in 2 of the 13 headings at the time in policy T5, which was transport at the time. And we at the time, my wife and I, we rang the Planning and Environmental Management at City of York Council and asked because the details seemed to be lacking. And we were told, and I quote verbatim, "The exact details of the corridor improvement are yet to be determined, so neither the policy nor the proposals map contains any further information regarding the extent of Phase 1 or Phase 2, and whether the corridor improvements will be on-road, off-road, either segregated cycleway and footway or combined footway cycleway, or a mixture of both." Now, at the time that the plan contained for this particular corridor, it amounted to a line drawn on a map, no more, which didn't look like a plan. So, with reference to the Gantt chart, I'm just wondering, can you point me to the Gantt chart at which the infrastructure for this particular development of the cycle network is proposed, so that we can actually have a look at it, or perhaps in the absence of this possibility, suggest why not. I don't know if now is the time for me to take this up, but I would like to take this up. That it seemed to us at the time we wrote our submission that the plan was severely lacking, so severely lacking that it didn't amount to a plan. Now, it could be that this has been done and we haven't found out, but I suspect that not. I'm not sure if there's time if this is the point at which to continue. I will do so. Okay. In 2016, Oxford City Council proposed a zero-emissions transport plan. When we looked at the York City Transport Plan, we had expected to find something similar, or at least taking on board some of the aspects of this plan. Now, this was 2016. In 2017, we commented on the draft plan, which contained nothing. At the time, now some of this has been resolved, and some of the suggestions we made have been taken up maybe independently of our. I note the VISM, for instance, and some of the transport planning has been taken up since. However, the Oxford City plan the trial began for that this year, 2022. It seems that the York City plan has not yet started. It needs to go back to the beginning, we think. We would look, so, okay. I would very much like to be shown to be wrong. I would like to see on a Gantt plan the plan for innovatory, cycling network infrastructure along this particular, it just happens to be where we risk our lives to cycle into town along, my old lady and I. And the plan that we have seen shows nothing. I would like to be reassured that the plan now does show something. But I very much would like to see it, and I wonder if now is the time for Mr. Ridge to point to where I can find this particular, this is just an example. Okay, that's enough for me for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Clark. I hear from Mr. Ridge before I look to the other side of the table. Mr. Ridge.
Yes, I mean, I think Mr. Clark has highlighted a general issue that we have in City of York Council, in that obviously the local plan deals with one level of detail, and underneath that there are several other levels of detail. Like all local authorities in the UK, we're working on something called a local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. We've undertaken a scoping exercise of what that would involve, and we're currently writing a brief to go out to consultants to actually deliver, to develop that plan. That will look at individual cycling corridors and pieces of cycling infrastructure across the city in, I would hope, the level of detail that Mr. Clark would like to see. But it's outside of the local plan process. It's part of the local transport strategy.
And what do you think, Mr. Ridge, should be the connection, if any, between this local plan and that cycling and walking plan?
Sorry, was that a question for me or for Mr. Clark?
It was a question for you, Mr. Ridge.
Oh, right, okay.
It was simply this. What connection, if any, do you think that there should be between this local plan and the cycling and walking infrastructure plan?
The connection is incredibly important. The developments where they are urban extensions have by and large been put near our existing on and off-road cycle network, or the bus network, or the rail network, or all three in some cases. And we look for opportunities to improve the walking and the cycling and the bus networks through development gain where that's possible. One of the figures in the plan, I think it is figure 6, Sarah, where we show the development plan, we show the development plots against the bus and the core cycle network.
So figure 6 of the plan.
Figure of the infrastructure note. It's figure 5, in fact. It shows the spatial distribution of the developments against those core networks. So yes, certainly developing walking and cycling links and public transport are very important components of how we mitigate the traffic growth of the plan.
And I see on there that you have core off-road cycle network and proposed future cycle routes.
Yes. The proposed future route that's shown on it is the orbital route that will follow the dual A1237 Northern Ring Road. So it is, it's proposed, but it is also funded. But we haven't built it yet.
So just to add to that point, the infrastructure note at Appendix 2 sets out policies that provide an enabling framework for the delivery of walking and cycling infrastructure. Policy DM1 deals with future updates to the infrastructure delivery plan as well, where these more detailed projects can be updated, arising from the walking and cycling infrastructure plan that Mr. Ridge has outlined.
So would I be right in thinking then that this local plan will inform the production of the cycling and walking plan and have influence on where new cycling and walking projects might be?
It does, yes. And especially in regard to the standalone sites ST15, ST14 and ST7.
Mr. May.
Thank you, sir. I just wanted to seek guidance, if I may. I wasn't expecting a discussion this morning on DP3, but I did want to pick up Mr. Elvin's point and just make sure that there wasn't a misunderstanding on York Civic Trust's position. We too have read in detail the very helpful guidance from TCPA, from the Royal Town Planning Institute and from Transport for New Homes. And I would wholly agree with Mr. Elvin. None of them suggests that self-contained communities are sensible or feasible, and that's not what we're proposing. What we have argued is for a definition of sustainable development which matches the guidance in those documents. And we have listed a number of attributes which at the moment do not appear in the local plan. I was assuming I would be able to talk to this matter onto matter 1 in the online session on Thursday morning. I'm very happy to leave it till then, but if you would find it helpful, I can just outline the additional characteristics which we think are important.
We think it's possibly best if we park that for today and deal with that through the virtual session. Mr. Corsia.
Thank you, sir. Can I just raise a procedural issue, first of all? I did not find this the new document until this morning. It's not flagged up under examination, news and updates. I only found it when I actually checked this morning to see if the council had made any response to my essay paper. So I feel, to Frank, in a difficulty today actually dealing with this paper. And so it does seem to contravene both the guidelines you set out in terms of production of evidence for hearings and indeed PIN's own guidance. There seems to be nothing in this document which should not have been produced several months ago. So if I could lay that, sir, because I've prepared today on the basis of the IDP and the Gantt chart. I think I'm getting nods here from Mr. May as well. He's done the same. So, sir, I leave that sitting with you, how that could be dealt with.
Can I just ask for clarity about when the update note was published?
Wednesday. And I did mention it was coming last week.
So I have no recall whatsoever of that by Mr. Elvin being told that this was coming. And I certainly, sir, as I say, the previous practice in this examination is that where papers are going to come forward for sessions late, they are flagged up in the examination news and update. And I have kept myself informed by that. I did not think I had to trawl through all the papers, the list of documents. But, sir, I can only say that far.
This can be a bit of an issue in examinations. I mean, having said that, updated information of this sort is always, well, almost always at least, helpful to us. I understand the position that puts you in. I think if it is causing difficulty for you to engage today, then possibly the best way for us to deal with that is to take any additional comments that people might have in writing. I can see Mr. Elvin looking a little weary at the prospect.
Well, it's simply the fact that we put it on the website nearly a week ago. Mr. Corsier's submissions in his matter statement in relation to 6.1 to 6.4 basically says these are matters for the council to answer. So he wasn't raising any other points in any event. So this is a bit of a, if he doesn't mind me saying so, a bit of a storm in a teacup.
So we have made representations on these matters, as Mr. Elvin's fully aware. So I'm happy dealing with anything. I would like to read the document in more detail because I have not, all I've done is scan read it before walking in here today. As I say, I've prepared on the basis of the IDP and the Gantt chart. I've tried to cross-reference quickly to see if there's any other impacts. There are, for example, matters such as traffic generation, which are important to Fulford, which are referred to in the new document. I would like the ability to actually put something in writing if I feel that I've missed something today. And I don't know if that's an if, sir.
So I'm not resisting. If Mr. Corsier thinks he hasn't had a fair crack of the whip, then I've no objection to it going in writing as long as the timescales are pretty short.
Yeah, and I think if that applies to Mr. Corsier, it should apply to others as well, because there's the same issue. So perhaps what we'll do is put something up on the examination webpage that sets out a deadline for that, which will be reasonably short one, because certainly I will want to see what people have said before we reach the phase 3 hearings. Yeah, well, and indeed, if there's any response we need to make, I'd like to wrap that up, as we've said, in relation to the new trajectory information and the note that went up on the website about that last week. So we want to wrap that all up so any further material can go in before phase 3. Could I perhaps ask Mr. Elvin, because we're rather tied up here, if someone in your back office there could write something to go up on the examination webpage, that I'd be grateful. Would a date, say, middle of next week be, say, next Wednesday? Would that work? I can barely remember what today's date is, but... I'm having difficulties as well. I think we're maybe into June by then. 1st of June. Thank you. Yes. 1st of June? Mr. Merritt?
Sir, I had substantive comments.
Thank you. Sorry, I've been... had my card up to speak on the exact same issue. 2 points. There's obviously the specific documents that Mr. Corsier's referred to, but there have actually been a substantial number of statements of common understanding also added to the website at the same time. And for those of us who are voluntary, I do have a day job as well, it presents a major challenge trying to handle all of these documents right at the last minute. And if I very much welcome some ability for additional written submissions as appropriate, but we do need a reasonable timescale. I've got to be at work next week, so yeah, and I've got an existing and other commitment on one of the days this weekend. So can we have could I humbly request a slightly more generous timescale, please?
We'll come back to that, I think, at some point today and clarify it before close of play. I think we'll need to deal with that with the council to talk about what's reasonable for everybody.
Yeah. I mean, we've been working on the basis that we need, assuming phase 3 goes ahead, which you've yet to decide, I appreciate, but we need to be working to produce something in response by about the 10th or thereabouts, so time is fairly constrained. And whilst obviously sympathetic to Mr. Merritt, the fact he's having to deal with this part-time, I understand that. Equally, it's not unusual for inquiries, particularly plan examinations, to throw up additional material as they proceed. I just wonder whether, again, assuming phase 3 goes ahead, it might be sensible to have a section in the examination and library which specifically flags up new material as it comes in, just to help people out.
That is a very good idea.
I do want to speak on something else, if that's possible.
Yeah, well, just hold fire on that for the moment. I'll hand back to you, Sam, and I don't know who you want to...
Mrs. Cook.
Thank you very much. First of all, I did actually want to sympathise with Mr. Corsier in his predicament this morning, because it is particularly confusing when on occasions the website does actually tell you that a document is new, but then on others doesn't, because it lulls you into a false sense of security. Either you do it properly or you don't do it at all. And I think Mr. Alvin has wisely offered up a system where it is recorded that the website gets updated.
I hadn't appreciated that was happening, to be honest. But okay.
The second thing I just wanted to say, in his introductory remarks, Mr. Alvin mentioned in particular, particularly in the context of viability, the freestanding allocations as they are described by the council, and the additional work that is ongoing. And I just wanted to confirm that on this side of the room, really crucial to us, is information that we are waiting for in terms of modelling. That's information from York Council and also National Highways. And those are going to be critical ingredients to understanding and agreeing how many homes one can get away from the now accepted second access to ST15. And these things will be very important ultimately when it comes to the site specifics. And it's no coincidence, holidays apart, that we've already made a request to the programme officer for us to be dealing with our site-specific site in the third week of those hearings, assuming that we go ahead in July, because we need to have sight of the underlying, as it were, information in order to inform our various matter statements and of course, critically, what we hope to be a comprehensive statement of common ground between us and the council. The other observation I have is that we are also working with the council, who are indeed a unitary authority and therefore the educational authority in regard to education. And again, one of the, you were given some additional information today in relation to primary, and in particular secondary school places, because there's an issue going on as to whether or not any secondary school provision needs to be on or off site. So I just want to flag these points because we're getting closer and closer to the 1st of June next week, and closer to effectively what would need to be your starting gun if we are to proceed in July.
Mr. Merritt.
Thank you. First of all, can I echo Tony May's points earlier about the sustainable development issue on behalf of the York Environment Forum, where we spoke on this matter at Matter 1, and from the Labour Party's point of view, when we will be speaking on the same issue on Thursday. We certainly did not anticipate completely self-contained. Our argument was about making them substantially self-contained, following, as Professor May indicates, the guidance in the Town and Country Planning Association documents, which we have also, I have also read. The second point I wanted to raise, Ms. Moyer for the Council gave some figures on the changes to the primary and secondary yields. Unfortunately, I didn't quite get all of the 4 numbers that were quoted, and I wonder if she could actually repeat them first, and then I'll make a comment.
I think they're in the paper.
Sorry.
At page 12.
Yep. I haven't got it in front of me. Sorry, I haven't got it in front of me.
Yeah, well, you'll find the figures there.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll make the point on the 2 that I did pick up. The primary school take was a change from 29% in the 2014 assessment to 37% in the latest figures. That is a very substantial increase. In effect, it's great. It's in effect an increase of over a quarter on the percentage figure that was being used previously, and that has a very potentially quite substantial effect on the number and size of additional primary school places that will be required. And it is not clear to me that those have been taken into account. I would like confirmation of that particular issue. And then if I could also turn to the discussion that has taken place on the cycling issues. Just to record for my sins, I was the lead member on transport from 1988 to 2002 and 2011 to 14. The first York cycling strategy was a document and policy that I commissioned in 1989, and that has led to the provision of substantial a degree of cycling facilities over the years. But I think the inspectors need to understand that the quality of that network, most of it, certainly the on-road bit, is not compliant with the current government standards, LTN 120, issued 2 years ago. And to bring it up to that standard will require very, very substantial levels of investment. And we flagged that in our written submissions to you. And one of the points that we've made in the written submission is what happened over the council's recent efforts to implement active travel measures and the Tadcaster Road scheme in particular. And we give that as an example because it has a very significant implication for the amount of money that has been included or ought to be included in the infrastructure development plan. It was 1.43 million, the actual expenditure, but the scheme is inadequate. It did not deal with the two biggest obstructions to a continuous LTN 120 compliant route, because basically the monies were totally inadequate. And the documents here are based, in effect, on out-of-date standards and therefore do not cover the monies adequately. And an additional point I'd make on that, the council, in the emergency active travel fund, received money for quite a large number of schemes, and has basically only implemented, if I'm correct, one of them. It has major delivery problems in doing that, and as a result of that, the announcement within the last couple of days in terms of the latest funding round for active travel, York has only got 1/3 million, which is absolutely trivial, and that probably reflects its failure to deliver, its failure to have a local, an LC whip in place. It is the only authority in Yorkshire that hasn't put the LC whip in place. And frankly, what the council is saying in the cycling area is frankly just not credible, and it is totally unsound. Thank you. Sorry, my final point is they should have done the LC whip so they could have actually fed it in to the infrastructure delivery, the updated infrastructure delivery plan.
Can I ask Mr. Ridge to deal with that, please?
Yes. So I think I probably have to declare an interest as a person who developed the Tadcaster Road scheme and was the project manager of that. I think there's a sort of overarching point which I've alluded to before, which is that there is obviously there's in presenting the local plan there is a decision about the level of detail that you present on transport networks particularly, and in York it's a city with a great deal of interest in the transport network. People come and live in York because of the cycling facilities and the walking facilities and the way they can get around the city. And that's something that, as a council, we welcome. But it does mean there's a very high bar of expectation on what we can deliver. The city itself has, as Mr. Merritt commented, and a lot of this is work that he promoted. We have a very extensive set of sustainable transport assets. Some of them are now quite elderly and they don't meet modern standards. There is quite a big job of updating them so that they meet the current LTN 120 standards, which are actually quite challenging to meet in a city like York, where the road network is by and large Victorian. It's of varied widths. You have utilities equipment buried in all kinds of places you don't expect. That is why we are developing our local cycling and walking infrastructure plan. Now, because we've been working in York on cycling and walking interventions for many, many years, the easy stuff has by and large been done. We're now dealing with things which are quite difficult to deliver and involve high costs and some pretty big decisions about moving things like utilities equipment, curb lines, reconstruction of highways, providing stretches of off-road cycle route where it's not possible to provide things on road because of the width, new overbridges, etc., etc. So we're working on our local cycling walking infrastructure plan. I think I would argue that the job of developing that in York is a bigger job than it will be in many other authorities, because it's not going to simply be a question of identifying where the routes go. It will involve some serious engineering consideration of the constraints across the city. We are on with that because it's a detailed procedure. It doesn't feature within the local plan documentation, but it will be a very important part of the local transport strategy that we are developing to deliver, amongst other things, the local plan growth, but also the city's economic strategy and the carbon reduction strategy we're talking about tomorrow. So it is, you know, a piece of work that we're doing. We acknowledge what Mr. Merritt says about the shortcomings of some of our existing networks. I think having worked in various places in the UK, although there are clearly shortcomings with York's networks, they are also much more extensive than pretty much anywhere else I've worked. And you know, that can be demonstrated in the very high level of cycling we see in the city.
Can I just ask Ms. Dilman-Moe just to comment on the education